right, so I think we'll get started, and I think we still have some of us still are joining on, but I did want to get started and just introduce myself and other team members on the line today. So my name is Liz Cardenas, and I'm a PFF fellow, and I will be your host for today's session, along with my co-host Jonathan Aragon, who's also a PFF fellow. And we also have a couple team members from PFF on the line, including Shamini Diaz, who is director of PFF, as well as Shelby Lamar, who's assistant director of PFF. So, and welcome everyone who is on the line. I'm going to quickly take a look to see if I didn't miss anyone else, but I believe the rest of you are here to just hear today's session, and I'm very happy to have you all join and learn about the diversity statement. This session will be a diversity statement 101, so we'll kind of cover the basics of a diversity statement, as well as just some key elements for those of you who already have a diversity statement, kind of some ideas as far as how you may further develop it. So hopefully the session will be helpful for all of you, as we all are kind of at different stages of our diversity statement and may kind of take away different kind of aspects from this presentation. But overall, the goal for the session will be to kind of get some grounding on the diversity statement and have some time to reflect on areas that may be important to you to include in your own diversity statement, since we're all very kind of unique in terms of our experiences and how we want to shape that out. So this session will in some ways be interactive, so we will have some time for reflection and conversation. So I did want to share a quick disclaimer. Just do that. That the session is recorded. So we will be recording the session, but we do have it set up on Zoom in a way where your images and your names will not be captured. So we do want to make sure that this is a safe space for us to share out. If you have any aspects that you would like to share, please keep in mind that it will be recorded, but we do encourage everyone to treat each other respectfully and be trusting and engaging with one another. So did want to open up with that. And just to start, since we're all maybe either new or very kind of fully developed diversity statement, we all might be at different stages. So I'm eager to hear from all of you, and you can send it in the chat box or feel free to unmute yourself. What are some, or what is a diversity statement, just kind of broadly, and how do you feel it's used? If anyone wants to share with us. And I'll give you all a couple minutes, or a minute or so. Anyone want to share?
I think maybe the diversity. Oops, sorry. I think maybe the diversity statement is how you see diversity, inclusion, and equity within education, and maybe how it lives through your practice as a pedagogue. And if that aligns with the institution that you're looking to teach at. So I think it's used as a matrix to see if you're in line with the institution. Maybe.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, that's a great definition, Monique, and you summarized it very well. A diversity statement includes all of that, and I'll kind of go in through all the details of that, but it definitely kind of covers your own kind of perceptions of diversity and kind of how they tie to the institution. So those are very core to the diversity statement, and we'll talk further about those elements. So thank you for sharing that with us. And that brings me to kind of the key elements of our agenda today. And the agenda is focused around, kind of broadly talking about the key elements of a diversity statement, and then exploring how diversity, inclusion, and equity, which is what you mentioned, Monique, is really important to include in a diversity statement. We'll also talk about different terms that are used in a diversity statement and kind of talk about the distinctions between them. So inequality, equality, equity, justice, all of these different aspects can be very core to a diversity statement and signify different things. So talking about what those look like, and then also identifying ways to teach, model, and practice inclusion for diverse learners. This could be in a classroom setting, this can be as administrators, as practitioners, and whatever aspects you're involved in, finding ways to talk about diversity, inclusion, and equity in your statement. So those are kind of the core elements for today. And for those of you who have just joined, one one activity that we're going to be doing throughout the session is reflecting. So I do want you all to walk away with some kind of tangible things that can be included in your own diversity statement. So as we're talking about these items, feel free to reflect on them in your own kind of personal experience and jot down some reflection thoughts. We will have some kind of breaking points in the presentation where we'll have time to reflect on them, but feel free to jot down notes for yourself as we kind of go through them and try to connect them to your own personal experiences. So I encourage you all to do that. And we'll start with talking about why you may need a diversity statement. So there's many different reasons why diversity statements are useful. Many of us have used them for graduate admission applications. So a lot of institutions require that you submit a diversity statement. You could also have a diversity statement required for fellowships, grants, postdoctoral positions, faculty positions. Almost all of them require a diversity statement, and also increasingly non-faculty spaces. So a lot of employers are now requesting diversity statements to ensure that they're having equitable and kind of inclusive practices in terms of hiring. And then also they're used for promotion and tenure and a lot of different other aspects. So it's really helpful to have a statement that really encapsulates who you are and kind of how you connect your own identity with how you either teach, practice, or work with other individuals. So these are some of the reasons why. And as Monique described really well, and as others of you may know, a diversity statement may include different aspects of your own learning and development. So, you know, what specifically have you been exposed to in terms of diversity that has affected your own ways of learning, of developing as an individual? It also includes ways that you interact with people and organizations. So, you know, how has diversity impacted the way that you interact with an individual to ensure that you kind of have a mindful and inclusive mindset on how you treat others? And it also could include ways that you approach learning and development for other people, either through your own research, teaching, leadership, and different areas of service. So all of these are really important elements to capturing your diversity statement, but keep in mind that you might not capture all of them, or you might capture them differently depending on kind of your own background and what specifically you're using this for. So these are kind of the most common ones, but it really depends on how you shape it yourself. So wanted to give that caveat. And then I also wanted to share kind of some reasons as to why a diversity statement is important. And some of the reasons why it's important is because it presents your own specific position and approach to promoting inclusion and equity. So it's very unique to the individual and to the experiences that you bring as an educator, as a researcher, as a practitioner, as whatever you are in your field. It really helps make a very clear case for your own position. And it also allows for you to demonstrate narrative on your own awareness of current issues with diversity, inclusion, and equity in higher education. As we all know, this year has really unveiled a lot of inequities in different communities, different spaces, different identities. So it's very important to kind of reflect on those topics and really be able to speak to them and to talk and to think about ways that you're addressing these issues, including you know, Black Lives Matter, the kind of all the issues that have resulted from COVID. So all of these issues that are kind of really being unveiled in our society, how do we talk about them and how do we connect to these issues ourselves? So that's another aspect that you want to think about. And then lastly is describing how you've evolved in terms of your own engagement in these issues. So thinking about your past and then kind of what you've done in the past, what you're currently doing, and then also what you foresee yourself doing in the future. And really finding ways that that you specifically are promoting, teaching diversity, inclusion, and equity in your own spaces. And this can include research, teaching, service, and other aspects. So, sorry. And this is a statement on diversity, and there's many different ones. This is just one to share to think about just kind of the different aspects that make up diversity, and it includes a variety. The the Board of Regents of the University of California defined diversity as a variety of personal experiences, values, worldviews that arise from different cultures and circumstances, such as differences in race, ethnicity, gender, age, religion, language, abilities, disabilities, sexual orientation, socioeconomic status, geographic regions, and more. And as you can all see, this is a very broad term, and for diversity, I think it can include so many different aspects of kind of what makes up identities and what makes up communities, individuals. So the point of this is really to think about the fact that diversity is a very broad topic, but the most important aspect of diversity, inclusion, and equity in education is that it enhances student learning and outcomes. So really finding ways to kind of work within institutions, organizations, and classrooms that really promote student learning and outcomes with kind of a diversity and inclusive mindset in mind. So this is kind of when we start reflecting. So I'm going to talk about DEI kind of from a broad lens. And what I encourage all of you to do is to think about these different areas of DEI and kind of how we connect to these terms. And I wanted to talk about each term individually because they're all interconnected, but they do mean very different things. And in diversity statements, it's really important to think about how we relate to these terms and kind of what specifically we do within these spaces. And the first one is diversity, and diversity is, as you all probably know, a descriptive word. So it really describes different identities, different perspectives, different backgrounds, different ideas, and kind of the way we see them and the way others see them. So diversity is usually used as a descriptive term. Versus inclusion, it's an action-oriented word. So it's connected to a specific action that we do. So we could be an inclusive educator because we practice, specific ways that we teach, because we do certain things that that create spaces that are inclusive. So it's a word that's connected to, or it's an actionable way of being inclusive to others. Versus equity is connected to diversity and inclusion, but it's an outcomes word in the sense that we achieve equity by doing specific things, by working together collectively towards common goals that eventually result in equitable practices and in equitable communities. So it results in a specific outcome. So I wanted to talk about each of these a little bit. And as you all reflect and kind of think about these terms individually, I wanted to kind of think through how these kind of topics relate to one another. And the first one is diversity. And diversity, is, like I said, it includes a facet of multiple identities and perspectives. So it can be very broad. But the key area for diversity statements is that you want to think about specifically how you could address a diversity from a systemic lens and think about specific issues that may result in biases, including implicit biases that we might not even be aware of. And also what dimensions of diversity have resulted in oppression, marginalization, and exclusion of some individuals, and how we are working, or how you are working towards supporting that so that everyone has full access to succeed. So these are areas that are important to consider when thinking about diversity. And some areas that some of you may be passionate about and may be kind of doing in your own specific teaching and practice and looking at dimensions of diversity is some issues that may be part of racial and ethnic bias, gender bias, religious intolerance, ageism, cissexism, heterosexism, and ableism, which are all issues in the diversity space that are important to address in different ways, and it includes in teaching and advocacy and different aspects of our own spaces. So these are issues that can be included in your diversity statement, or you can just kind of reflect on and kind of how you've experienced these issues or how you're addressing these issues yourself. So that kind of brings us to the first point of reflection. And I included two questions, but you don't have to answer both, and you actually don't have to answer either of them. These are just some prompts to get you thinking about diversity and thinking about how you look at diversity and kind of what specifically you can speak to when it comes to diversity. And the first question is to think about, and feel free to write this down for yourself, or you can also just think about it. If you're aware or if you're aware of, or do you address biases or blindnesses in your teaching, discipline, or research? So think about that. The other question, if that one doesn't apply to you, or if it doesn't make sense, you could think about whether how you support diversity. So this thing could include plural mindsets, equity, inclusion, and this can be within the classroom, or it could also be beyond the classroom among your colleagues, faculty, or community. So I'll give you all about a minute to think about that, and feel free to jot down your thoughts. Once again, these thoughts are for you to keep, so feel free to be as honest and thorough as you would like to be. And then if any of you want to share some of your reflection, feel free to send it in the chat or unmute yourself. And I'll give everyone about a minute, and we'll come back together. Right. So we hit about a minute. For those of you who are still not done, feel free to continue writing. But just to be mindful of time, we'll reconvene. Does anyone want to share any thoughts that they have? Don't feel obligated to share, but if anyone would like to share, feel free to unmute yourself or send some thoughts in the chat. If not, we can move on. All right, we'll move on. I think that this is somewhat of a deep question, so we can go back to this one too as well if we have time. But I hope that captured some of the information that you all want to think about as you're shaping your diversity statement. So we'll move on to the next topic, which is inclusion. So inclusion is, like I said, it's an action-connected word. So it includes removing barriers to educational access and success, and finding inclusive actions and practices that recognize, embrace, and engage the design of education and the plurality and diversity of mind. So it's really important to kind of be mindful of the different ways that people learn, that people can engage, that people can react and be assessed. So being inclusive of different ways of doing that. And also having an openness, curiosity, and respect for differences. So these are all different ways that we can practice inclusion. And one important aspect in teaching that is a really useful tool when it comes to inclusion is the universal design of learning methods. So this presentation won't go into detail about it, but I did want to flag this as a good tool to use in your own specific teaching practice as different approaches for creating curriculum, teaching methods, and environments that allow students from all different backgrounds to engage and learn and flourish. So it's a really important aspect of teaching is practicing inclusion. So as you're shaping your diversity statement, think about how inclusion has impacted your own development and learning, and also how you practice inclusion kind of as a result in kind of your own teaching practice or research or scholarly practice. So that's another aspect, and this is what UDL looks like. I won't go into detail, but the kind of key takeaways for UDL is that it really allows for multiple means of representing information and having different ways for people to engage and express and react to the information that is being delivered and that is being taught and learned from. So it's a really useful tool to refer to, and there's links in the slides that you all can also reference. All right, so this is the next quick reflection, and for this one, the question is a little simpler. This question is, what in your experience has informed your approach to inclusivity? So it could be, based on kind of your own development as a person. It could be, specific things that, specific experiences that you had in kind of going through education. It could be specific areas that you've learned about. What has informed your own approach to being an inclusive teacher, educator, researcher, scholar? I'll give you all a minute to think about that. Okay, so we hit about a minute. Thank you all for reflecting on that question. I did see a comment from Madeline, which is a great point. She says, I think that embracing and reflecting on our own learning styles greatly influences how we teach, which is important to understand, as seeing that people learn in different ways. So I think it's an important point, and I think that's one of the key aspects of inclusivity is really knowing that individuals have different ways of learning. So how do we ensure that all individuals are able to learn by offering different modalities and different ways to assess for learning? So very good point. All right, does anyone have anything else they would like to share before we move on? All right, I think we will move on to the next area, which is equity. Actually, we have one more chat. Travel, yes. I love to travel, Janice. So that's another good point. Being exposed to different cultures, different aspects of life definitely helps us kind of have an open and curious mindset. So I agree that travel is important. Great. So let's move on to the last one of diversity, inclusion, and equity. So now we're talking about equity. And equity, again, is an outcomes kind of connected word. So equity results is a result of removing barriers of inclusive practices that create access and opportunity for a diverse range of individuals to learn. I included any social space, but it could be any space. So it could be an educational space, it could be a social space, it could be any ways that we interact with an individual. Equity is the outcome of there being, just removing of barriers and kind of having an inclusive approach to working with individuals. So equity, let's move on to the next slide. An aspect that's really important to think about in equity is that there are systemic barriers that need to be addressed, and it involves creating access and supporting engagement towards success. There are many barriers that we could think about that have prevented communities, individuals from being able to engage and be successful. I included this image of the Black Lives Matter to teachers because there is a lot of really important attention to specific issues when it comes to specific communities, ethnic, racial backgrounds from not having kind of the same opportunities to learn. So it really is an important area to think about as we kind of shape our own approaches, mission, and statements when it comes to being inclusive, equitable, and diverse leaders and educators and scholars. And one area to think about when it comes to equity is that although equity and justice are connected, they can be somewhat different in the sense that equity involves creating tools, identity, and to identify and address inequality. So inequality is when you have unequal access to opportunities versus when you have equality, all the different tools are just as accessible, right? So like an example would be for students right now in this online space, do all students have the opportunity to join a Zoom meeting? Do they have limitations when it comes to their broadband access, to their computer access, to an environment that allows for them to learn? So some students may be experiencing in, inequality when it comes to having kind of the proper tools and resources and assistance to support them in their learning. So the goal in equity is to create ways to address these inequalities so that all students have the same tools, same resources, or not even the same, but basically to meet kind of their own specific needs to learn. And justice also addresses equity, but it's a part of fixing our systems and really looking at systems of oppression that have resulted in unequal access to tools and opportunities. Equity and justice are both very important, but they do have that distinction where justice, you are looking at it from also from a systems lens and really kind of changing some of the oppressive and other aspects of our systems that have resulted in disparities and inequities in how people are treated and how people learn and how people experience our systems. So with that, I wanted to give you all another minute to think about ways in which you have engaged with diversity, equity, and or inclusion, and think about specific issues that are important to you. So what issues have you been involved in, or areas? They don't really necessarily have to be issues, but what specifically have you been engaged in that that you're passionate about, that that you feel has impacted you and impacted others as it relates to diversity, inclusion, and equity? And I'll give you all a minute to think about that. So we're at about a minute, but I'll give you all a little bit more time for this one in case anyone needs it. This is kind of the last reflection. Um, and I also encourage all of you, I'm seeing some good comments in the chat box, so I encourage all of you to share anything that comes to mind in the chat box as well. And I'll give everyone a couple more seconds. All right, I think we'll come back together. So thank you everyone for reflecting on that and adding some thoughts in the chat box. Before we go to the chat box, would anyone else like to share anything on like unmuting themselves? Does anyone want to share any additional thoughts? Great. Well, just wanted to quickly react to some of the ones that I see here in chat. Jonathan made a good point about thinking about just how individuals have access to resources, in our communities, depending on their own specific backgrounds, and backgrounds could be a lot of different things. But access to resources is an important thing to consider when it comes to ensuring that we are engaged in diversity, inclusion, and equity. Lauren, amplifying people of color and kind of their own voices when you teach is also Black, Indigenous people of color is also very important. The fact that a lot of texts come from marginalized authors and academics, and how that impacts individuals who do not come. Or I'm sorry, over 80% of my texts are from, oh, that's great. Actually, that's the opposite. So it's actually good to have authors that come from these backgrounds so that students can relate to non-traditional aspects or scholars and journals. So giving students a space to amplify their voices, great. That's and also including equitable practices in your syllabi. Janice, that's good too. I think it's important to kind of keep in mind kind of your own specific discipline and kind of who that represents, and kind of also just being inclusive of other individuals that may not be connected specifically to your discipline, including men and LGBTQ populations, communities, members. Tamar. Yeah, so Tamar's point is also good. Thank you for sharing that experience, Tamar, of just students of color or people of color and kind of their work in responding to police brutality, and really kind of supporting individuals and supporting students and leaders to voice their experiences and opportunities to improve equity. Madeline, teaching inclusion in the books and providing ample representation. Yeah, thank you, Madeline. I think that's another great point. Shamini. Yep, so engaging beyond the classroom. Oh, referring to Tamar. Yeah, thank you, Shamini. It's another great point. So yeah, thank you all for sharing those thoughts. And we're almost at the 15-minute mark, so I wanted to kind of close now with the presentation. And I hope this kind of helped you take away some ideas as far as aspects that you would like to kind of shape in your own diversity statement. Just to close, I did want to kind of quickly summarize some aspects that you may want to consider in thinking about your diversity statement. Is Understanding diversity in the context of structural inequities. And you can include kind of your own social perspective or social justice perspective on these issues. It could include racial oppression, ableism, homophobia, sexism, any aspects that you feel speak to who you are and to kind of your own experiences, perspectives, and experiences as a diverse individual, because we in one way or another have kind of our own diversities and experiences that make us very unique. And how specifically you address that within kind of your own space and context is important to capture. And also focusing on issues and opportunities and pedagogies that support diversity of individuals, of identities, and of different statuses, and kind of integrating those aspects in your diversity statement. And I know this was a quick chat, so there are opportunities to kind of further talk about these issues with us, fellows, as well as Shamini and Shelby and anyone from the PFF team. So feel free to make an appointment with us, and we'd be happy to talk about some of your thoughts and kind of some of the aspects that you've reflected on as you kind of shape your own diversity statement. So feel free to make an appointment with us. The link will be on the slides, and you can also find it on our PFF website. And I wanted to, I have a couple more slides, but I wanted to do a quick poll for everyone. If you could just share, this is important for us to just kind of capture how the session went and kind of where you're coming from. So please complete this quick poll for us, and then we'll finish up. I'll give everyone a minute or so. Yes, and thank you, Christina, for that question. I'll answer that question in quick minute. So give me just a minute for everyone to finish up the polls. All right, I think everyone has submitted their answers. So I'm going to end the poll now. Thank you for participating in that. And Christina made a good question, Christina. So Christina posed a question of kind of the distinction between the diversity statement and the teaching philosophy statement. And it's a good question because, and it's a common question that is important to talk about. So the diversity statement, the main aspect that kind of differentiates a diversity statement versus a teaching philosophy statement is that the teaching philosophy is a lot broader. So you talk more about kind of your own philosophy as an educator and kind of some of your practices and assessments and all the different areas of how you teach and kind of who you are as a teacher or kind of in your own kind of teaching practice. Versus a diversity statement, it's really focused around kind of your own experiences with diversity and how that has shaped your own action, perceptions, different ways of looking and supporting and addressing diversity, inclusion, and equity. So it's really more focused on DEI and really kind of narrating it from your own perspective. So it doesn't have all the additional elements of a teaching philosophy statement, although when you have diversity, inclusion, and equity at your core of teaching, it will be reflected in your teaching philosophy statement. The diversity statement is an opportunity for you to really focus on those issues and to really narrate them in a way that connect to you as a teacher, scholar, and educator, leader, practitioner in your own space. So it's really an opportunity for you to talk about those issues as they relate to you. So I hope that answers your question. And if not, feel free to make an appointment with us and we'd be happy to talk about that further. All right, so we will finish up now. Another opportunity that I wanted to share with everyone is our LinkedIn page. If anyone hasn't joined LinkedIn, feel free to find us on LinkedIn. You can search CGU Ethical Pedagogy Community on LinkedIn and you will find us there. We're really building out that space to have it be a place for community building and for opportunities to connect with one another and kind of share different events, different resources, tools that that we may all benefit from. So please join us if you have not joined and you have a LinkedIn account. I also wanted to share upcoming webinars. So there are 2 happening pretty soon. The next one will be led by Jonathan, who is our co-host today on learning management systems and how they're meaningful and how to build meaningful and effective discussion forums. So it'll be a really good session for all of you to attend if you're available. And then there's another one coming up on transformational teaching and learning, which is an overview of Kristen Olson's Wounded by Schools, recapturing the joy in learning and standing up to old school culture. And that one will be hosted by Catherine Connor, who's also a PFF fellow. And the slides will be emailed. So I know there was a question about the slides. So we will email them out. You can also find them on our website. And please do take advantage of all the services that we offer, including consultations. A lot of us are open to consultations this semester. So if you have any questions that are still outstanding from this session, feel free to make an appointment with us and be happy to discuss them further. We're on other social media platforms, so you can find us different outlets on our Linktree, PFF website, Instagram account, Twitter, and Facebook. And I also included a lot of different resources that you may want to look at deeper in terms of just your diversity statement and DEI. So feel free to look at those resources. And that is all. So I'll open it up for any additional questions. And I have been seeing the chat box activities. So let me see if there's any open questions. If not, if anyone has questions, feel free to unmute yourself and I'd be happy to answer them. And I'm going to just quickly review the chat box as well. So I think I don't see any questions. Oh, question. What is one tip to not have your diversity statement sound forced? That's a good question, Tamara. I think I guess the simplest tip I can give you is to really make it unique to your own experiences. So you really have to, and that's why I was hoping these reflections will allow for you to kind of think about that further. So the goal is not to reiterate kind of what's out there. We want to make sure that it connects to us and kind of how we have as individuals been shaped by diversity, inclusion, and equity. You don't have to have a specific way of approaching it as long as you show that you understand diversity, inclusion, and equity and the value that it brings to student learning outcomes, and narrate it from your own experiences and perspective. So I would say that the biggest tip is just to reflect and think about how these issues relate to you and how you are addressing these issues in your own kind of practice and teaching. Yeah, and I'll give others time for questions. If not, I will give you all a couple minutes back in your day, but feel free to stick around.
Okay, so I put something in the chat because, you know, we're all thinking about, okay, how do I do this? What do I do? How do I write the diversity? And where do I come from in my department? But what if you're, I don't know how to exactly phrase this, but obviously there is such a diversity and pluralistic way of looking at this. You've got so many groups, so many categories, so many races, so many, all of this stuff, you know, to know all of it, you're gonna probably be excluding somebody somewhere. So what covers that part of a statement so that people don't feel that you've excluded one group from another.
Mhm. It's a good question, Janice, and I don't have the perfect answer for you, but I would say the closer you can get it to your own kind of experiences and discipline, the more clear it will be in terms of how you kind of express it. So for a diversity statement, you can't cover everyone's diversity. I don't think anyone can in one statement, but I think the goal that you may have is to really connect it to kind of your space, so what specific issues in diversity or inclusion relate to your own experiences, your own issues that you think are important. You there's no way that we could cover all of them, at least not in one statement. You could probably write a whole thesis on this, but the goal is to really connect it to your own kind of experiences and your own kind of space.
Can I add to
Thank you.
that?
Yeah, Dominique.
Liz, you put it really well, that your own experiences and your own space. And when you're writing something as finite as a diversity statement, maybe one of the things to think about is to acknowledge in that statement that there are areas of learning. One of the things about being an equity-minded person, educator, practitioner of any sort, is that you don't know. That's very, very important, because then you approach every situation with humility, with generosity, both to yourself and to others. So I think thinking about how that manifests in your own life, like Liz says, always connecting it back to yourself in your diversity statement, is not to have to name everything, but to understand what diversity means. Yeah, Tama, you're right. But that's what we're trying to change. We're trying to say, not the teacher as expert, the teacher as learner. This is who we are.
Yeah.
It should be at the beginning of every course, every semester, maybe even every class session. Like, you're not supposed to know. I mean, why are we here otherwise?
Yeah. Well, you are all the faces of that change. You're all going to go out there and be that curious practitioner, the learner practitioner.
Something else you could do is talk about how you may not have all the resources for students, but you can act as a resource person and talk about your awareness of different centers that are on campuses that you can refer your students to.
Yeah, I think those were all good points. I think there's a certain level of vulnerability when it comes to kind of creating our diversity statement, because it's true. We don't know all the answers, right? And I think the goal is to just have an open mind and an open kind of mind to the different ways that we could still learn, because there's always opportunities to develop and find new ways to be inclusive of individuals and of different identities and different backgrounds. So coming at it, like Shamini said, from a humility and kind of generosity perspective is definitely a really good way of approaching it, especially as we start reflecting and thinking about how we want to narrate that in our diversity statement. So thank you all. Does anyone have any other questions, thoughts? Lunch plans? I hope you all had lunch. If not, lunch will be coming soon. Yes, great to see everyone. Great to see you, Tamar.
I'm going to my favorite restaurant after this, which is my refrigerator.
That has been most of our lives for quite some time now.
I'm becoming a much better cook.
Oh, yeah, that's good.
According to me.
We are our best critics, so I'm sure it's good.
Yeah, there should be a Yelp review for refrigerators,
Oh yeah.
right?
My fridge is so full. It's fuller than it's ever been.
Yeah, we're cooking and eating at home more.
Yeah, the groceries go by fast.
Another minute in case they have a outstanding question. But again, if you have questions after the session, feel free to make an appointment with us, with me, Jonathan, Shamini, Shelby, or anyone else from the PFF team, and we'd be happy to further talk about these areas.